watching A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching this on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. You'll notice we are not in the garden right now. We're going to start out inside and start our food preparation that we usually do at the end, and then we'll come back to it a little later because it needs to simmer for a while. Today I'm making minestrone or minestrone. I looked it up. Both pronunciations are acceptable. Minestrone is probably the more Italian, but minestrone is acceptable, and it's kind of an American Italian soup anyway. So however you pronounce it, it's a tasty soup. And I'm going to start out by heating up my pan with 3 tablespoons of oil, and I'm going to add a large chopped onion, on these nice days, it's good to stay outside as much as possible, and that's what I would like to do. I also have about 2 to 3 celery stalks that have been chopped. I can fix something inside, and 2 very large carrots that have been chopped. All these are about the same size pieces. I'm going to also add 1 chopped shallot and a good-sized clove of garlic that's been chopped. We're going to cook those around in the oil for about 5 minutes, just until they start to soften. This soup has plenty of vegetables, so it's really a one-pot meal. I'll stir these around so that they don't brown on the bottom. We just want to soften them up a bit. We don't want to burn them. Now the vegetables have softened slightly, browned a little bit, and it's time to add some more ingredients to our soup. I'm going to add 1 quart of beef broth. If you want to make this a vegetarian dish, you can add vegetable broth. It'll work just fine. Either one, you could probably even add chicken broth if you wished, and that's what you had on hand. I'm also going to add 1 can of stewed tomatoes, juice and all. We'll just put it right in there. And some seasoning. 1 tablespoon of dried parsley. When you're using dried herbs, you add them at the beginning. When you're using fresh herbs, you add them at the end. It's kind of a rule of thumb. It doesn't always apply, but generally it does. 1 tablespoon of basil, again dried. Fresh herbs, if we were using, I would add at the end. And a 1/2 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. We'll stir that around. Bring it to a quick boil. It's starting to boil now, so what I'm going to do is turn the temperature down to low, and we're going to go outside. We'll come back and finish the soup a little later. This is a nice soup to make if you have other chores to do around the house and don't have all day to sit and watch the pot. It will just simmer here for about an hour or more or less. You can simmer it a little more if you have to go pick up children or deliver packages or do anything that requires about an hour's worth of time. And then you come back and finish it a little later. So I'll meet you outside. Here in the herb garden, it's the end of April, and spring, I think, has finally decided to make an appearance in Massachusetts. and in Norfolk in particular. So here I am out in the herb garden, and I've been very busy the last few days cutting things back. And this is a southern wood, and I've got most of it cut back. I've just got a few more stems to take off. You can see how tall it was. I'll bring that down, and it should put out some new growth. And we'll get rid of that. I've also trimmed back most of the thymes and the green Santolina. And we've also been able to pick some chives. I could pick a little of the sorrel that's over on the other side. And tiny bits of tarragon or oregano. I won't pick those really yet for another week or so. They will be growing by leaps and bounds as long as we get a little rain, which is predicted, and then some more sunny weather, which is also predicted. Before that rain, I want to sprinkle a little all-purpose fertilizer, kind of just broadcast it over most of the herbs. Give them a little extra. This was not great soil when I put in the herb garden. A mistake I made by not having it a little more fertile. So we've been playing catch up ever since. So I'll just put a little bit on, and then the rain will come and wash it in. I can also do that with a little lime if I feel that maybe it needs a little on some of the things. The thymes particularly. The rhubarb and of course the sorrel, they won't need any thyme at all, or any lime, because they like it acid. Instead of using the all-purpose fertilizer on the roses that are in here, I will use a rose fertilizer. It has a slightly different composition. I like an organic one, and I'll sprinkle that around the outside edges. And then I can just stir it into the soil a little bit, either with my gloved hand, or I could use a trowel or a fork. But that'll give the roses here a little extra. I use this also on the other roses in the garden. Another thing I want to do is hang up a birdhouse. Birds are great to have in the garden because they do eat some of the insects that also eat plants. So encouraging birds is always good. And we'll see if we can get this up over the top of the branch and then fasten it on the hook. There, we have that one up. The wrens usually come back to Massachusetts about the 1st of May, as do the hummingbirds. So very soon I'll be getting my hummingbird feeder out as well. I have a variety of birdhouses that have all been cleaned. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. It's time to prune the grapevine, and I have a grapevine on a trellis. Now, I don't get many grapes, but it is something that I enjoy having over my little sitting area, so I want to trim it back to some strong buds. And I'll go all the way around on this. And also this one's kind of hanging out, so I want to encourage it to go the other way. So again, back to some strong buds. And then we can tie these up when we see which way they're going to go. I'll take out some of the crossing ones too. And this one, cut way back. Actually, when you cut them back, it encourages them to grow even more. So basically, I'll just do an all-over pruning on this. It goes way up. So I'm going to probably take this one all the way back. And we have quite a long piece out of that one. And it tends to grow together, so we can take out some of the pieces. And anything that doesn't look particularly strong, I'll remove. I'll keep going over this until I get it right. It may take a couple tries. Cutting off any stubs that are out and growing in places where I don't want them to grow. This is a longer piece that's over the top. It will go over the top, so actually we're encouraging it to do so. But it does require a little bit of help along the way. So I'll keep going. with the other ones. This one is divided into two larger pieces up this way. And again, we'll take them off at a strong spot. And then I'll come out with my string and tie them into position, and hopefully they will cover the arbor as the summer progresses. And again, I would like that one to grow the other way. So basically that's pruning rose bushes. If you're pruning them for actual getting a lot of grapes, you actually take them back quite a bit further. You can find all kinds of instructions in a variety of books. I want mostly foliage, so I leave a little more on them than normally would be there. The next thing I'm going to be doing in the next couple weeks is digging up plants. Some of my plants have overgrown their territory, and I need to dig them up and pot them up. And these are going to be for the Garden Club's annual plant sale in May. But in order to have a nice looking plant to either sell or share, you need to dig it up a couple weeks in advance. It won't look too good for a while. And we want to get some of the dirt in here. This is a Boltonia, which is very similar to an aster. It blooms in the fall. I want to make sure the roots get right into the pot. And I can actually probably take 3 or 4 more plants out of this area because it's gotten to be way too large. I'd like to confine it just to a small area right here so I have room to plant something else. And it doesn't crowd some of the other things that'll be coming up here. There are some lilies coming up in the area as well, so we want to save room for those. Again, I'll put that in a shady spot and water it, keep it watered, and it will grow and develop into a nice plant that would be well worth someone's time to buy and plant or as a gift. I have a variety of plants that can be divided that way. It really strengthens the perennials if you do divide them occasionally. I'm going to move over this way. Various things are coming up. Trying to be a little careful not to step on things. And again, I'll be thinning things out the next few weeks as they start to emerge and I see how much has survived the winter. It's time to prune the roses, and this year I bought a new pair of clippers just for rose pruning. It's good to keep a separate pair because roses, you can spread disease from rose to rose. And I can also use an alcohol wipe to wipe the clippers after I'm finished using them, and this will help keep from spreading disease. This is a little knockout rose, and I need to cut it back fairly low. I don't want a too bushy rose in this location. I'm going to cut underneath a new bud. The first thing you do with a rose is prune for health, and then the second thing is to prune for symmetry or design. So I'm going to take out some of these canes that do not look well. Actually, this whole large one has a little problem, and let's see if we can get the whole thing out. Roses respond well to pruning, so don't be afraid to prune them. And again, some of the small shrubby pieces I will take all the way back. And again, this shoot doesn't look extremely good. And this little piece is crossing. Anything that's crossing you need to get out too. You want to open up the middle of the rose, particularly, so that the air can circulate. This helps with disease prevention. Here's another little one that's going to be crossing, so we'll take that out. This one can come all the way back. It's too close to the other shoot. And then I'll pull this one back here. I've really done quite a pruning on this. We'll see how it responds. It should respond with some vigorous new growth. To help it do that, I'm going to dig in some rose tone, the fertilizer again. If we can get it open here. Come back and pick up my rose canes later. Roses are quite hungry. They like a lot of fertilizer, and they need to be fertilized several times a year. The first being after they've been pruned back. And then I'll just use the little fork and fork it in. And probably when I'm doing my divisions, take out some of the grape hyacinth that's around it so that it has good air circulation. I'll put my new clippers away, and before I use them again, I will use the alcohol on them and make sure they're completely dry so that they don't rust. I have a lavender here next to the rose, and that too can be pruned back a bit. It's nice if you can see some new growth coming out, but I do see green as I clip. So I know that the lavender will respond to the pruning. And again, it will put out new foliage. These are kind of broken stems, so we'll cut those all the way back. It likes it a bit on the lean side, so I probably won't do too much fertilization of the lavenders. Now I'm going to move on to a hydrangea bush, and I have several of those, and they're the ones that I want to be blue. So I want to spread some of the soil acidifier around those plants. And again, I'll fork that in. I could also use a hoe if I didn't want to bend. This will help keep the soil acid around the plant and hopefully provide some blue blooms. This has not been a great bloomer for me. It may decide to be replaced. We'll see if it does anything this year. I haven't pruned it back yet. I'm waiting to see if there are any new leaves or new growth that comes out on the old stalks. It might just happen that way. I'll use more of the rose tone fertilizer over here on the rose and clematis. Both of those can take more of the rose tone fertilizer. And again, I'm just going to sprinkle it around and work it in. I've already trimmed this climbing rose back quite a bit, and the clematis is still in the process of coming out. And what I'll do with that is wait a little bit, and you can see there's some green on it. There's also some brown. So once it starts to climb up the rose stalks, I will go through and very carefully remove any dead stalks from it. But it likes the same condition as the rose. And the hope is that it will continue to grow right up the trellis and have the blue blooms in this area. Put this down, and this is a tree peony, and the only pruning that you need to do on a tree peony is to take off the little shoots that are next to the blossoms that have winter killed. And if you have a large shoot that's winter killed, you can also remove that. For instance, there's one down here that is growing way at the bottom. And this one needs to be cut off. This is in the process of leafing out. And I'll use some of the acid fertilizer Hollytone on this bush, as well as some of the other peonies. They will really like that and grow well with it. Again, we can put that down. Butterfly bush, this can be trimmed all the way to the ground, and should be. You'll see shoots coming out, but it will be much more controllable if you cut off all the shoots now. I won't do the whole thing, but you get the idea. You cut it all the way back. You may need a larger clipper to do it if it's grown really well. I have several butterfly bushes, and they generally grow about this tall in a single season. This is where the hummingbird feeder will go. Hummingbirds adore the butterfly bush as well as many of the other flowers in this area, so that's why I put it here. Our rhubarb is growing well, but it isn't ready to pick and won't be for probably another month along the way. Some of the spring bulbs are still in bloom. I have the primrose that I planted out that was inside for the winter, crocuses, and anemone. I'm particularly fond of anemone blonda, which is a white one. It seems to be the hardiest of the lot. They also come in pink and blue, and it's a spring flower that will completely go away after it's finished blooming. You don't have to do anything to it. It's a bulb that you plant in the fall, and it gives you these lovely little white daisy flowers in the spring. Now let's move over to the vegetable garden. Plenty's going on over there. We're down in the vegetable garden, and I have a couple blueberry bushes. They don't do much, and I realized why. I read recently that the first year you have a blueberry bush, you're supposed to remove all the blossoms. That's the same as with strawberries. With strawberries, I've always done it, but I never knew it applied to blueberries as well. That's to get the bush established. I didn't do it with these, and I've never really had great blueberries. The birds seem to be able to enjoy them more than we do, even though I do cover them up. You can prune off any old stalks on them now, and then give them a good dose of Hollytone fertilizer. They really like acid soil, and the Hollytone will work with acid. And I'm also going to use some of this stuff that turns the hydrangeas blue, which will also acidify the soil around the blueberries. And I'll just spread a couple of good handfuls around the blueberry bushes. I'd like to plant a couple more and treat them properly and see if we really do get some blueberries. They have fairly shallow roots, so you don't want to go too deep. And I would water this in if I didn't have the information that it was going to be raining later today and into tonight. So now I'll let Mother Nature do the work for me. Then after it rains, and when the soil is nice and moist, they also like moisture, I'll mulch these with a little peat moss. I have some peat moss. I would not necessarily buy more because it is a rather endangered product, but I have some, so I will use it. I could also use pine needles or pine bark mulch around them. Again, anything acid would be very good to use on them. But they are strong feeders and they like it really acid. That's why we will use these products. The next thing I'm going to do is do some more planting. And I'll move over to this area. The things that we planted just 2 weeks ago are already coming up. I have spinach and chard, and what else did we plant? Some radishes, and they're all coming up really well. The strawberries are doing well too, and I've mulched them with some straw that I had left over from last year. And they're in there, tiny little plants, but they will be growing up. The peas haven't yet made it. They haven't germinated. I did mulch the edges, and I've put up my poles for my fence, but I haven't put up my fence yet. So you'll be able to see what I'm doing. And today I'm going to be planting a couple more rows. And the first one's going to be onion sets. You can grow onions from seed. You can grow onions from little onion plants, or you can use the sets, which are basically little onions. And I like these because they grow really fast. And you can use them as scallions or green onions when they're small. And then there'll be large onions to store. And I'm going to put these 2 or 3 inches apart. And I'm going to plant a whole row, and I'll use half of the row as green onions and the other half of the row as storage onions. These are yellow onions. They also come in red and white. If you want to use seed, you need to have started it in about February in order to get little onion plants to put into the garden. And you can buy the little onion plants as well. I've dug down several inches for these. They need a deeper trench. You want to completely cover them. So we'll cover this batch up. And then I can see where to start in again a little later. And pat it down well. Try to get some of the stones out. I have very stony soil. Actually use one to cover them. And again, pat it down and make sure it's nice and firm over them. If you have it, you could also put a little bit of compost on top of them. That gives them a little extra nutrition and helps the onions to grow a little larger. It's not quite covered. There we go. The next things I want to plant are some beets. And beets need to be planted very thinly. I've got 2 different types of beets to plant. And I'm dug a little narrower trench for these because the seeds are a lot smaller than the onions were. And I'm going to plant a few red beets. These can all be planted before there's a frost-free date. And I really can't plant with gloves on to get the seeds separated because I want these about 1 inch apart. And then I'll probably end up thinning them. Each beet seed contains more than 1 plant, potentially. So you want to spread them out a little bit. Rocks can be handy. And then we'll cover those with about 3 times their size in soil. And again, try to keep it stone free. The next one I'm planting, and I'm planting more of these, would be the golden beets. We really like the gold beets better than the red ones, and they're very hard to find, so it's worth planting them. And then you'll have a harvest of your own golden beets. They're not very popular in the grocery store. And I will plant these a little closer because in the past they have not germinated quite as well. Any thinnings of beet greens that you pull up, or even baby beets, can be used in salads. And again, I'll cover those with about 3 times their size in soil, or perhaps a little bit more, and pat them down well. Again, there is some rain coming, which will help, but it can also wash seeds out. So you want to make sure they're patted down really well. Then the next thing I want to plant is carrots. Carrot seed is pretty small. And so you do want to plant this quite thinly. You're still going to have to thin them out. It's just inevitable because you need to have them finish up with 1.5 to 2 inches between them, or you won't get carrots of any size at all. But the seeds are quite tiny. Sometimes they come pelletized, and that means that there's a little larger seed. They put a pellet around them so that they're easier to plant. And again, because they're tiny, they don't need a whole lot of soil over them. Just smooth it out a little bit. And I'll write on my garden plan what I planted, where I planted it. I have a little drawing, and when I planted it. That way, if something doesn't germinate, I'll have some idea when it was planted and how much time to give it. You can also plant kale now, and very soon you can set out broccoli plants as the weather warms just a little bit. I will continue with this row. I've decided I'll probably put tomatoes down at this end this year. They were at that end last year, so I'd like to have them in a different spot. It takes some planning to do a vegetable garden in order to rotate the crops to different locations. And you don't have unlimited space like a farmer would with acres and acres of fields, but you still can work things around in the garden so that nothing is quite in the same place it was the year before. And that's what I'm trying to work to get. Now let's have some fun and go over and make a planter. As we go by this plastic bag, I've been doing a lot of thinning of some of my ground covers. And what I'm doing with them is putting them in the plastic bag and solarizing them. If I put them someplace else on my property, they would very likely grow, and I'd just have the same problem of too much ground cover. So by putting them in the bag and setting it out in the sun, the black plastic will gain heat, and the plants will literally cook in the bag, and then I can take them to the transfer station in the bag. So that the bag will be there for a while. until the plants have had time to solarize, and we've gotten a lot of warm sun. The plants we planted in the milk jugs last winter inside, some of them have already come up, some of them will come up in the near future. On sunny days, I can open the jugs by removing some of the tape, and because there's going to be a heavier rain tonight, I'm going to leave them closed today. But if it gets up into the 70s or 80s instead of the 60s, I will definitely come out and flip the tops on these jugs so that they get the sun. I'll also watch to make sure they stay watered. We do have plants growing in some of them. Let me see if I can open this one. These are some of the Brussels sprouts we started. And I think I'll have to get some scissors to open it. But there are Brussels sprouts inside. I think you can peek in a little bit and see that the little plants are growing. And they can be set into the garden in a few more weeks. The kale, there's some red kale there too, that's also germinated nicely. Now let's start a planter. I love pansies. They come in such cheerful colors and have such cheerful little faces, and I really enjoy them. I usually buy several 6-packs of pansies, only this year the growers seem to be putting them in these baskets. It looks very nice to buy, and I'm sure it's easier for the growers because they have a lot more root. However, it's hard to get them out. What I did is I took a knife and actually cut them apart. And I'm going to put them in my planters. These are very nice sized plants. And I'll put 3 of them in this one. Or more, maybe we'll put a few more. 4 or 5. Because I have something else to plant in here as well. And I've added a little compost to the potting soil that I put in this planter. And I'm just going to plant the roots in at the same depth they were growing in the nursery pot. The area where we are is semi-shady. It gets quite a lot of morning sun and a bit of afternoon shade. And I think I have room for one more. Move this one over. It's nice to plant in uneven numbers. It seems to be more aesthetically pleasing. And now I want to plant between them some lettuce. And the lettuce did come in 6-packs. And I've got various varieties of lettuce in the pack. We'll kind of spread them out. And some of the bright green as well. These 6-packs have pretty concentrated roots. So as I plant them, I'm going to want to kind of spread the roots out a little bit, break them out, and then just tuck them into the soil. Again, spread out the roots a little bit so that they'll go into this nice soil. This will be an early crop of lettuce. We'll be able to eat this in another 2 weeks for salad. And it grows nicely in the planters early on. Later we'll have lettuce from the garden, but this gives us an early taste of fresh lettuce. And I've got one more. And I'll put that in the middle. But then to give it a little interest, I'm going to use some of the red dogwood sticks that I cut off in the fall. I used them in the fall planters, and they just add a little height to the planter in this location. I'll put them around that central lettuce. And this will fill in as long as you deadhead the pansies, and that means cut off the blooms once they're gone. They will bloom for a very long time. Let's put this one in over here. I'm going to put those together in the middle. Gives it a little height. Now another one I'm going to plant, and I'm going to use the lettuce again. And this is a primrose that I got last week when I went to the garden center to get the pansies. Pansies can also go into window boxes, and that's probably what I'll do with the rest of them. This is a primrose, and it's of a different type. And again, there's a couple blooms that are gone already, which we'll discard. But this is a double primrose, and I couldn't resist it. We'll also take off some of the leaves that have gone. And it too has quite a root system, which I want to loosen up a little bit. I'm going to enjoy this in the planter for a while, and then I'll plant it into the garden in hopes that it returns next spring, like the other primroses have returned for me. And I'm going to use this as the center of this little pot. And plant a little of the lettuce around it. This is quite a mixed batch with some mixing of each one. Again, we'll have plenty for some salads. And again, the lettuce will last quite a long time if I just pick some of the outside roots. And I'll put that over here next to my two chairs. I'm going to move it over right now and set it between my two red chairs. I thought the nice red primrose would add a nice little accent right between my chairs for the spring season. We'll watch those progress. I'm going to water them in well. Every time you plant plants, you should water them in, even if rain is in the sky. This helps the roots kind of get established to have a very nice drink of water. These will, since they're in pots, need to be watered frequently if we don't have rain. They'll tell you when they're dry, they'll droop. And now let's go back by the pond and the greenhouse and see what's growing in the shade garden. A couple of Massachusetts natives are planted in this area. I see the start of the May apples, which will be up in probably a couple more weeks. But this one is bloodroot. I have both the single and the double, and it's another nice early little white plant. It is spreading. It spreads very slowly. I'm happy to see it here with the hellebores. And that's another reason I cut the leaves, the old leaves off the hellebores, so that the other little things that come up around them will show. The pond hasn't been cleaned yet. I will be lowering the water soon. I have a little pump to do that, and then refilling it with more water. I'll take out maybe 1/3 to 2/3. Then I'll add the waterfall and the filtration equipment. And I'll wait for a nice warm day when I have plenty of time to get muddy before doing it, because it does get a little dirty. Right here near the pond, I have some little miniature daffodils, Trollius, which is the yellow plant, and it's again a spring ephemeral, meaning it blooms in the spring and then it goes dormant for the rest of the year. So we enjoy it while we have it, the lovely little yellow blossoms. There are several colors, they're all yellow, but various shades. Again, I've transplanted these daffodils a few years ago and they're just starting to bloom. I really like the little ones. I also have a hosta in here, and the hosta are starting to come up. So there are some things you need to do if you have hosta. One thing is some fertilizer. You're mainly after green with hosta because you want those nice leaves. You want the nice leaves, so I'm going to use a fairly high nitrogen fertilizer, which turns out to be tomato fertilizer. Works pretty well. Or any fertilizer that's a little higher in nitrogen. And I want to put some of that around each of the hosta. A little compost would also be good. I want to keep the deer spray handy because they need to be deer sprayed even when they just have little shoots, because the deer will go right down there and have them for dessert. And the other thing you need to worry about are slugs if you're in a woodland situation particularly and it's damp. And I have these little pellets called Sluggo or Slug Magic. Depends on the brand. You do not want slug bait. Slug bait would be poisonous to animals. But this Slug Magic is for use around all kinds of things, and it's a safe one. And its active ingredient is iron phosphate. And I just want to sprinkle it all around them. And the iron phosphate reacts with the slug's slimy little body and it kills them. So we want to start early with the Slug Magic before it gets out of control. I think each slug can bear about 40,000 eggs. So you want to start early or you will be overrun with them if you have this little damp woodland situation. And you want to grow hosta. That and the deer are the two big enemies of the hosta, and sometimes people if they step on them. But these products do help get them to grow lovely and lush, which is what you want, free of deer and slugs. Now let's go inside and see how our soup is coming. Well, it's time to come in from outdoors and finish our soup. This has been simmering now for about an hour, and you can see it's cooked down quite a bit. The tomatoes have all broken up, and it's time to add some more items and let it simmer a little longer. I'm going to add a can of white cannellini beans. Those are white Italian kidney beans. A can of kidney beans, red kidney beans. About half a can of canned green beans. And a third of a cup of small soup pasta. There's so many different shapes and kinds of pasta. This is going to be a thick, almost stew when we're finished because the pasta will expand about 3 or 4 times its size. I'll turn the heat up a little bit and then simmer it some more. This is tubatini, and it's a small soup pasta. There are various shapes. You can get little bow ties, all different little tiny pastas. I really have fun looking at them in the store. And I have various ones. Acini di pepe is another small one, and that one I use in Italian wedding soup. It looks like big grains of rice. But tubatini makes a nice soup pasta for minestrone. And we're going to just let this keep cooking now for another about 45 minutes, and then we'll be ready to serve it. You could have actually, after the hour's cooking, put it in the refrigerator to save until evening if you wanted to do it early in the morning to have a meal at night. Then you'd only have the 45 minutes to heat it when you came home. While it's cooking, I'm going to make a few things to go with it. And I'm going to start by melting a little butter. And I'm going to make some garlic bread. And I have my things ready. And I picked some of the chives this morning. I'm always anxious to have the chives when they're in season and fresh. And I've also minced a clove of garlic. So this is garlic and chive bread instead of just garlic bread. I'm going to use my bread knife to slice half a loaf of Italian loaf. This is a sourdough bread. I'll slice it in 2 pieces and put it on a baking sheet. That done, we can put the knife away. And the butter's starting to melt, and I'm going to be adding the chives and the garlic to the butter as it melts. Make a spread for the bread. Garlic becomes a bit sweeter when it's cooked, so I always like to cook it a little bit. And if you roast it in the oven, it becomes very sweet and makes a wonderful spread for bread. You can roast a whole clove of garlic and then peel it as you use it. And it has a texture almost like a spread rather than crispness. But we'll just cook this a bit. And then I'm going to spread it on the bread. And I can use both the spatula to kind of spread out the chives and the garlic. And we want to pour on a little of the butter as well. Let it soak into the bread. Actually, if you don't like garlic bread, you can do this with just about any herb. Thyme makes a very nice bread. Just fresh thyme. And again, you would mix it with the butter, cook it just briefly, and then spread it on your bread. And then we'll finish this off, getting it ready to go in the oven. And again, you can put it under the broiler or at 350. It's kind of your choice. Depends what else is cooking in the oven. Since I'm going to be making some peach crisp, I'll put it in with that. And then probably finish it under the broiler. Right now I'm putting Parmesan cheese on it. And I'll sprinkle it with a little paprika, just to give it a little color. And a little bit of flavor too. Once it comes out of the oven, you can slice this bread into finger-sized pieces, probably about 4 slices per piece of bread. Now our soup is boiling along pretty good. We'll give it another stir. And put together a peach crisp to go in the oven. This is my go-to recipe for any type of fruit crisp. And today I'm using some frozen peaches, about half a package of frozen peaches. And they can either be your own frozen peaches or canned peaches or purchased. These are purchased frozen peaches without sweetening. They're just peaches. If you use a tart fruit, you can add a little sugar. I prefer just the plain fruit. Then I'm going to mix together a 1/4 cup of salt, or not salt, flour. No salt. About 1/3 cup of brown sugar, and that's getting a little hard. 1/4 cup of oatmeal, any type of oatmeal, either the quick or the old-fashioned. about a teaspoon of some sort of spice, and I'm using an Oriental 5 spice, which works with about anything, and a half to a teaspoon, kind of on your own, depending on what fruit you're using. If you're using apples, you might want to use cinnamon and nutmeg. Sometimes I put just the raw apples in with some frozen cranberries, make cranberry apple crisp. And then I'll add 3 tablespoons of butter, and I'm going to put on the glove and mix it with my hand. It's the quickest way to do it. You can do it in the food processor, but the butter has been softened, and I'm going to just mix that together to make crumbs till it gets crumbly. You could also add nuts if you wished. Again, a 1/4 cup of oatmeal, a 1/4 cup of flour, about 1/3 of a cup of brown sugar, and 3 tablespoons of softened butter. If your fruit is very juicy, you could add maybe 2 teaspoons of cornstarch to the fruit to thicken it up a little bit. We kind of like it juicy, so I'm not adding anything to it. Just the crumbs on top. And I'm going to sprinkle those over the top. Rough crumbs. And we'll bake this in 350 oven for about 25 minutes. And we'll have apple crisp when we're all finished. It will be nice and brown on top. And it's good, very good served warm, which makes it an ideal last-minute dish to prepare with some yogurt or vanilla ice cream or any flavor ice cream you like, really. Now, let's see how our soup is doing here. These items are ready to go in the oven a little later. Time does not permit us to cook them right now, but I will put some of the soup in the bowl just to show you what a colorful meal it will be in a meal in a bowl. And so there's our minestrone. I'll get a knife. And we have a few daffodils to put behind it. Daffodils, if you pick daffodils to bring in the house for an arrangement, remember not to put them with other flowers. If you put them with other flowers, they will kill the other flowers. If you leave them in water in the house for several days and change the water, then you can add other flowers. But daffodils are best just by themselves. So we're ready for a quick spring meal of minestrone, garlic bread, and peach crisp. Thank you for joining me today for a walk in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.